I don't understand it, the developer said quietly, standing in the courtyard with his hands at his sides and the afternoon light falling across everything like something patient and unhurried. I've walked through 100 buildings this year. I've never once stopped walking. Why did I stop here? His assistant, Fletcher, who had worked for him for 3 years and learned to interpret silences as precisely as words, said nothing. He stood 2 steps behind and watched his employer stand still in a way he had never observed before. Not the stillness of waiting, but the stillness of unexpectedly arriving somewhere. The building was not impressive by conventional measure. 3 stories, pale cream exterior with window boxes of trailing ivy, wide arched doorways. A courtyard in the center open to the sky with raised garden beds and a low curved wall that functioned as both seating and boundary for the children's area. In the far corner, 3 children sat on cushions while a woman with a soft voice read from a picture book. 2 others were at a low table with colored pencils. A grandmother sat on the curved wall nearby, shelling something into a bowl, humming a tune that went nowhere in particular and arrived exactly where it intended. The developer's name was Prescott Lane. He was 36 and had not felt peace in 4 years. He recognized its absence the way you recognize a sound you haven't heard in a long time, by the quality of the silence it had been replaced with. Standing in this courtyard, something in that silence shifted. He did not yet know why. Her name was Tavita Crane. She was 30 years old and had been an architect for 6 years officially, and in her mind since she was 8, and drew floor plans in notebook margins while teachers discussed other things. She lived with her parents on the east side in the house she'd grown up in, which she'd returned to 4 years ago after her marriage ended in the particular quiet devastation of a thing that doesn't end dramatically, but simply stops. Her husband choosing a woman whose family had more to offer professionally. She had come home with her daughter, Lumen, who was 4 months old then, and now, at 4 years old, had opinions about buildings, which she believed should have windows that let in good light and spaces where people could laugh. "You have to build houses where people can smile, Mama," Lumen had said once, watching Tavita sketch late at night. It was the kind of thing 4-year-olds say that sounds simple and is actually the most precise architectural brief Tavita had ever been given. She had been trying to build it ever since. Tavita's father, Wendell Crane, was a project manager who had spent 30 years on construction sites, reviewing calculations and schedules with unhurried thoroughness. When he reviewed Tavita's designs in the evenings, spreading them across the kitchen table and saying nothing for long stretches, she trusted those silences more than most people's praise. "This is good," he had said, looking at the community building plans for the first time. He tapped the courtyard layout. "You put the life in the center. Most architects put the impressive part in the front and hide the life in the back. You flipped it." Her mother, Rosalind Crane, was an actress who had worked 20 years in small television roles, the kind of consistent mid-level career that pays bills and earns respect from people who understand how difficult consistency actually is. She told Tavita during the months after the marriage ended that rejection was part of every career worth having. "They reject you because you threaten something," Rosalind said. "The question is not whether they'll reject you, it's whether you'll let them be right."
The 6 years between her first day at the architecture firm and the day Prescott Lane stood in her courtyard had the particular texture of work done without sufficient acknowledgement, the kind that either wears a person down entirely or slowly clarifies what they are working toward. In her first year, she designed residential buildings where her ideas arrived in meetings and left attributed to colleagues with more seniority and louder voices. She learned to document everything. There was one project where she had designed an innovative natural ventilation system that would have reduced energy costs by 30%. Her senior colleague presented it as his own innovation. When Tavita pointed out the documentation in her project files, he smiled and said, "Ideas belong to the firm, Tavita, not to individuals." She had understood perfectly. She had also started keeping a second set of documentation at home. In her third year, she began developing community concepts, designs incorporating green corridors, children's learning spaces, shared gardens. She presented them to 3 development firms. 2 declined. 1 told her with particular condescension that her ideas were charming but not commercially competitive. She took charming. She kept working. In her 4th year, she began saving carefully, not for emergencies but for intentions. She opened a separate account. Some months it was $40, some months more. She kept a notebook with the buildings she intended to make on the first page. During this time, Lumen would sometimes crawl into her lap while she drew, pointing at windows and doorways. "What's this room for, Mama?" "That's where people can read books together." "And this one?" "That's where children can learn to grow things in the garden." Lumen had nodded solemnly. "And they can smile there?" "Yes, baby, they can smile there." In her 5th year, she found the plot in a neighborhood development maps described with bureaucratic neutrality of neglect. The plot's owner, Augustine, when Tavita appeared with her drawings, sat with them for a long time and sold it to her significantly below market rate. "Because you knew what it was for before you bought it," Augustine said. "Most people don't. It shows. My sister used to run that laundry. She knew everyone in the neighborhood by name. When she died, the building died with her. I've been waiting for someone who understood that a building isn't just walls and a roof. It's a container for human lives." She broke ground in the spring of her 5th year. Wendell supervised construction evenings and weekends, calling in favors from contractors who trusted his judgment. One of them, a mason named Hector Rees, donated an entire weekend of labor because Wendell had helped his family when his son was in the hospital. "Your father worked my shift so I could be there. Never asked for anything back. This is how these things work. We build for each other." Rosalind helped with Lumen and brought food for workers. She also used her modest industry connections to get local news coverage for the community involvement in the planning process. "People need to see that this is possible," she told Tavita. "That someone like you, without massive capital or connections, can still create something meaningful." It took 14 months. There were complications. A delayed permit, a contractor who disappeared mid-project, a week in December when unseasonal rain flooded the partially completed courtyard, and Tavita stood in the downpour crying because she thought everything was ruined. Wendell had found her there, put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Water drains. We'll fix it. Buildings are patient. They wait for us to get it right." And they had gotten it right. Prescott Lane had not intended to visit the building that day. He had been en route to a site meeting 2 blocks away and took a different street because of a road closure, and the building had simply been there. He told Fletcher to wait. He walked in.
The ground floor was open and airy in a way that felt deliberate. High ceilings with clear-story windows that brought light from angles that made the interior feel lit from within. The library corner had low shelving, cushioned reading nooks built into walls at child height. 3 shelves had small handwritten labels in different languages: English, Spanish, Tagalog. What struck him most was the quiet intentionality of every detail. The reading nooks were positioned so that natural light fell directly onto them during afternoon hours, when children typically came after school. The table heights varied, acknowledging that community meant different ages, different needs, different ways of inhabiting space. There was a small kitchen alcove with a coffee maker and a handwritten sign that said, "Free, take what you need, contribute if you can." He walked upstairs. The residential floors were simple and carefully designed, each unit with storage built intelligently into walls, and each with a window facing either the courtyard or garden, so no resident looked out onto a wall. In the hallways, he noticed handrails installed at 2 heights for both adults and children. Bulletin boards positioned outside each unit for neighbors to leave notes, share information, build connection. He stood in the empty unit at the end of the second-floor hallway, at the window looking down into the courtyard, and watched the children with their colored pencils and the grandmother with her bowl, and felt something move in his chest that he did not immediately identify because it had been so long. It was the feeling of a place thought about from the inside out. His late wife, Maren, had talked about this.
had talked about it often before the accident when she was developing ideas about what cities should feel like for people who lived in them rather than invested in them. She had a notebook, he still had it, in his bedside table drawer, unopened for 4 years, full of drawings of spaces that looked not entirely unlike what he was looking at now. Maren had died on a Tuesday morning, 4 years and 7 months ago. She had been on her way to present a community housing proposal to a city planning committee when a delivery truck ran a red light. Prescott, drowning in grief, had abandoned her vision entirely and built what investors wanted instead: luxury towers with marble lobbies and no soul. He stood at the window for 4 minutes without moving. Then he went back downstairs and out through the courtyard and stood on the pavement outside. Fletcher approached carefully. Prescott looked at the building's facade and felt his eyes become wet, which had not happened to him in public since Maren's funeral. He did not understand it yet. He simply stood there and let it be true.
He came back the following week, without Fletcher, without scheduled reason. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon and sat on the curved wall and watched the space function. He noticed things he'd missed the first time: the way residents greeted each other by name, the way an elderly man paused to help a young mother carry groceries up the stairs, the way children played freely while adults worked or read nearby. He was sitting there on his 3rd visit when a small boy appeared at his elbow. The boy was 4 years old, with Prescott's own coloring and Maren's way of tilting his head. His name was Caspian, and he had come with the nanny, Delphine, who brought him to the community garden twice a week because the boy had recently become interested in growing things. Caspian sat down next to Prescott without asking permission and looked at the garden beds. "Those are tomatoes," he said. "The ones on the left. The ones on the right are something else. I don't know what yet." "Neither do I," said Prescott. Caspian looked at him sideways. "You come here a lot. I've seen you 2 times. 3 times, said Prescott. Caspian considered this. "Delphine says you come back to places when they make you feel something. She says that's how you know what matters." Prescott looked at his son, at the careful, observant face, always measuring things, always storing information. He felt the familiar pull of grief that had made him, over 4 years, less present to his son than he knew how to correct. "She's right," said Prescott. "Delphine usually is." Caspian nodded. Then, with the particular directness of children who haven't yet learned to avoid difficult subjects, "This place feels like the pictures Mama drew, the ones in her notebook." Prescott's breath caught. He hadn't known Caspian remembered those drawings. "You remember those?" "Delphine showed me. She said Mama wanted to build places where people could be happy together, like this place." He looked up at Prescott. "Is that why you keep coming here? Because it makes you think about Mama?" "Yes," said Prescott quietly. "That's exactly why." The girl appeared from the far end of the courtyard at a careful walk. She was 4 years old, with her mother's precision about her. She went directly to the garden beds, crouched, and began examining the soil with a small stick. Caspian watched her for 30 seconds, then he slid off the wall and crouched beside her. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "Worms," she said. "Healthy soil has worms. We haven't found any yet." "I could help look," Caspian offered. She handed him a stick without looking up. Prescott watched his son and this girl crouch side by side, turning soil with serious collaborative focus, and felt something loosen that had been held tight for a very long time. Her name, he would learn shortly, was Lumen.
He found out who the architect was on his 4th visit when he asked Delphine to inquire at the building's small administrative office, staffed by a volunteer named Harriet, who was 70 and gave Prescott the architect's contact information with an assessing look. "You're the developer," Harriet said. "The one who's been sitting in our courtyard every week." "Yes," Prescott said. "What do you want with Tavita?" "Just to talk. To understand how she did this." Harriet studied him for a long moment. This building isn't for sale. Tavita built it for the community, not for profit. I'm not here to make an offer, Prescott said gently. I'm here because this building reminded me of something I'd forgotten, and I'd like to know the person who remembered it for me. Harriet's expression softened slightly. She wrote down Tavita's information. She's a good person. Worked herself half to death building this place. Don't waste her time. I won't, Prescott promised. He looked up Tavita Crane that evening. Her portfolio was modest in volume and precise in quality. Residential and community work. No major commissions, no industry awards. She had designed a community center and 2 affordable housing complexes in neighborhoods where his own firm had declined to develop as insufficiently profitable. Then he searched for her father's name, Wendell Crane, project manager, because something about the name had snagged in his memory. He found it in 15 minutes, a project record from 11 years ago, a construction contract for a mixed-use development, Prescott's first significant project. The project had encountered structural problems that could have voided the contract and left Prescott with debt that would have ended the company. The project manager who had identified the problem before it became critical, who had worked 3 consecutive weekends to implement a remediation plan, that name was Wendell Crane. Prescott had known the name for 11 years. He had thanked the project manager formally at contract completion. He had not known he was thanking a man whose daughter would, 11 years later, build a building that made him stop walking. He sat at his desk for a long time. From Caspian's room, the small sleeping sounds of a child who had spent his afternoon looking for worms drifted through the half-open door. He thought about the way kindness operates over long timescales. The way of thing done without expectation of return travels forward through years and connects to things the person who did it never imagined. He closed his laptop. He went and stood in Caspian's doorway and watched his son sleep. Then he walked to his own bedroom, opened the drawer of his bedside table, and carefully removed Marin's notebook. The leather cover was soft with age. He opened it to the first page. Her handwriting looked back at him. Buildings should feel like kindness. He read until dawn. He requested a meeting with Tavita Crane the following week. Tavita, who received it while reviewing the community building's first-month usage report with Harriet, read the name twice and then showed it to Harriet. Prescott Lane. He's in the building every week, Harriet said. I gave him your information. I decided he was acceptable. Thank you, Harriet. Don't let him buy it, Harriet said. It's not for sale. I know, Tavita said. It was never going to be. They met at the building. They sat in the communal area with coffee Tavita made, and Prescott told her what he needed to say in the order it needed to be said. He told her about Marin's notebooks first, about drawings on napkins, about how he had walked through her building and felt, in the particular spatial language buildings speak, something that matched what he had been unable to articulate about his wife's vision for 11 years. Tavita listened without looking away. She had the quality of someone who receives difficult information without flinching, not because they are unmoved, but because they understand that looking away would cost the person speaking something they cannot afford to lose. I didn't know her, Tavita said when he finished, but I think we would have agreed about most things. I think so too, Prescott said. Outside the glass partition, Caspian and Lumen were in the courtyard, crouched once more at the garden bed with their sticks. Prescott watched them. Your daughter looks at things the way you designed this building, from the inside. Tavita looked at Lumen. She told me once to build houses where people can smile. I've been following that brief ever since. Prescott said nothing for a moment. Then, there's something else I need to tell you. He told her about Wendell Crane, about the project 11 years ago, about the weekend work and the remediation plan and the contract that had been saved. Tavita went very still. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. He never told me, she said quietly. In 6 years of this project, he never once mentioned that he'd done something similar for someone significant. He just helped, because it was the right thing to do and it was in front of him. Prescott nodded. I recognized it immediately, because it's exactly what you did with this building. You built something that wasn't required of you, that nobody asked for, that didn't make commercial sense. You built it because it was the right thing to do. Tavita looked at him for a long moment. What are you asking me? I'm not asking you to sell it, he said immediately. What I'm asking is whether you'd be willing to design more of them, with my resources behind you. Not my direction, your direction. You lead the design. I provide the funding and the sites and the political access. He paused. I've been building the wrong things for 4 years. Profitable things. Things that look impressive from the street and feel empty inside. I'd like to start building the right things. I think you know what those look like.
Tavita was quiet for a long time. She thought about Lumen's brief. She thought about her father spreading plans on the kitchen table and tapping the courtyard and saying, "You put the life in the center." "I have conditions," she said finally. "I expected you would. Community consultation at every stage. The people who will live in these buildings help design them. That means slower timelines than you're used to." Understood. No investor pressure to increase unit density beyond what works for the people inside. Agreed. And my father consults on every construction project, as project manager of record, properly compensated. Prescott almost smiled.
I would have suggested that myself. I owe him a proper professional engagement, 11 years late. Tavita nodded slowly. Then she extended her hand. He took it. Outside, Lumen called across the courtyard. "We found one! Caspian, we found a worm!" Caspian's answering sound was pure, uncomplicated delight. Prescott looked through the glass at his son, at the open face, the uncomplicated joy of a child who has found what he was looking for in a garden he didn't know he needed to be in. The first new project broke ground 8 months later in the Selden district. The design process took 5 of those months and involved 47 consultation meetings with residents, 12 revised floor plans, 2 complete reconceptions of the courtyard layout, and 1 significant disagreement about parking allocation that Tavita won because she was right. Wendell Crane was project manager of record. He told Tavita twice that it was the most thoughtfully engineered community structure he had worked on in 30 years. The second time he added, without elaboration, that he was proud of her, and then returned to the drawings. Rosalind attended the groundbreaking and photographed everything and told everyone she spoke to that her daughter was building something the city needed. At the Selden project opening, on a bright Saturday morning with the courtyard full of people and children moving between garden beds and Caspian explaining the worm situation to impressed 5-year-olds and Harriet supervising the library corner, Tavita stood at the front and spoke. For years, I designed buildings for people who never noticed them, ideas that went into other people's projects and came out without my name on them. I spent a long time believing that the work was enough. She paused. I still believe the work is the most important thing, but I've learned something else. When you build something with kindness, not just with technical skill, but with the actual lives of the people inside it at the center of every decision, people don't just see it, they feel it, they come back to it, and sometimes, if you are very lucky, what you built finds the people who needed it most. The gathering was quiet. Then Caspian, from beside his father at the back, said clearly and without self-consciousness, "That's like the worms." There was a pause. Then laughter, the specific warm laughter of a group of people who are all in the right place. Prescott looked down at his son. Caspian looked up at him with Marin's eyes, and Prescott felt for the first time in 4 years that the distance between himself and the world was something he had chosen rather than something he had been given, and that it was therefore something he could undo. "Exactly like the worms," he said. The strongest structures are not built with concrete and steel alone. They are built with the accumulated weight of small kindnesses, choices made without audience, help given without expectation, spaces designed for the dignity of the people who will inhabit them.
What Wendell Crane did on 3 weekends 11 years ago, without fanfare, because it was the right thing to do, that kindness traveled forward through time and connected to a building that made a grieving man stop walking. What Tavita Crane built over 6 years, that work created a space where a boy found a worm and felt for an afternoon simply and entirely happy. We do not always know what our quiet acts of goodness are building toward. We only know that they are building something. That is enough reason to keep going. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories filled with kindness, hope, and humanity. Leave a comment below to share how this story made you feel, and help us spread more positivity in the world.